All right, hello and welcome to a conversation around biblical leadership with our friend Costa Mitchell.
Hi, Matt.
It is awesome to have you with us.
Thank you.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt. I'm part of the School of Leadership team. For those of you who don't know what School of Leadership is, we are an online platform that focuses on developing good theological training and leadership training. And you can find out about us on the link below. Go and have a check. We'd love to have you join us. So first of all, it's good to have you with us.
Thank you.
It's lovely having you. A little bit of a backstory from my side. I've known you my whole life.
Pretty much.
I
I think you were still in nappies
Yes.
when I met your parents.
Okay, cool. What was I? 12? No, I'm just joking. No, I was much younger, and some of my formative memories have actually been in your home with your family. And so this is so cool that I get to do this with you. So
Lovely.
Thank
Very
you for
good.
the opportunity. I just thought, just to start off with, if you want to just give us a bit of a glimpse into the beginning of Costa Mitchell. I know that wasn't your original surname from a family perspective, because I know there's, it's not a surprise that you're a proud Greek. So why don't you just give us a bit of insight as to...
Yes, a lot of people ask the question when they see my multinational name, Costa Mitchell, and they go, so was your mother Greek? And the answer is no. The surname used to be Michalopoulos.
Michalopoulos.
Yeah, which is basically the son of Michael.
Okay.
In Greek. And my grandfather, when they came to South Africa when my dad was a baby, and he was he came following the gold rush in Witwatersrand, and then became an entrepreneur and did different things, and he found that a name like Michalopoulos was not good for business. So he shortened it to Mitchell, and that's what it became by regular usage. And so, yeah, I come from a combination of a Greek father and a multinational South African mother.
Wow.
Who came from German, Dutch, English stock.
Wow.
So we are the United Nations, our family.
That's awesome. I don't really know where my family came from. I heard we stole sheep in the area of Wales.
Yeah, you maybe shouldn't investigate.
I know. I don't know if I should, but I think we all have that longing that maybe there's a wealthy someone.
Yes.
But not my luck. Nothing.
No.
Nothing. Okay, so you grew up in South Africa, and just maybe explain a bit about your formative years growing up in the home. What was it like from a religious perspective? In what context did you grow up in that way?
Yeah, so from first of all, a religious perspective, I grew up very confused.
Okay.
Because my father was, of course, Greek Orthodox, as most Greeks are, and I was, in fact, baptized. And when the Greeks say baptized, they mean baptismo. It's not sprinkling, it's not dry cleaning. They take a baby and they dunk that thing under the water. And I still remember the day because I was baptized, I think I was 3 or 4 years old. And I thought the priest was drowning me and getting soap in my eyes. So I was screaming blue murder. Anyway, so that was my... And of course, in terms of the Greek church, also most expatriate, even Greeks in Greece, probably are 3 times a year church attenders.
Yeah.
We were once a year.
Okay.
And because we didn't live in a town that had a Greek church anyway.
So what was it? What was the event that you went to?
Easter.
Easter. Okay.
That's the big festival for most Greeks.
Is the lamb.
Yes,
Brilliant.
Exactly. And then my mother was, on the other hand, a Christian Scientist. So,
wow.
So we initially attended a Christian Science Sunday school, and then fortunately moved away from the town centre and out to the suburbs, and where there wasn't one of those.
Okay.
And so I ended up in Methodism as a Sunday school kid.
Okay.
And so that was my kind of compromise up until the time I finished school.
Okay.
But in terms of the family, I'm the middle of 3 boys who grew up in wonderful home. I mean, I'm one of the people, and I know that there are not many who can say that is privileged to say, I couldn't have chosen a better upbringing.
Wow, that's awesome.
Better parents, the way they raised us, their love, their care, the fact that my father was my sports coach in every sport I played all the way through school. Except rugby. He never got into rugby, but he was my soccer coach, my cricket coach, and my main supporter at every game I ever played.
That's wonderful.
So, you know, and my mother also, I suppose, on a basis of if you can't beat them, join them.
Yes.
Became the scorer for the cricket side when I was in both primary school and high school, so that she was doing something useful while we were playing. So that was our story. It was typical suburban, white suburbia, and yeah, the effect, both good and bad, of being in that little bubble as a white kid growing up in apartheid South Africa, which said some things to my later development as well.
Okay, so let's go a little bit to that later development. Maybe let's fast forward a bit to student life. And I think that's when you started to encounter a spiritual journey of sorts. I don't want to no spoiler alert. So why don't you just talk us through Jesus finding you, what that process was?
Yeah, so I finished school early. I was one of those kids who my teacher thought was a good idea for me to skip a grade. And so,
really? I didn't know that. What grade was it?
I think it's now called grade 3, standard 1.
Oh, you're lucky. That was a hard grade.
Yeah. Might have been grade 2, something like that. And so I finished school early. I hadn't turned 17 by the time I finished.
Wow.
And I had, and I was also a late developer. My voice hadn't broken. I wasn't shaving or any of those things.
Not shaving for a Greek at 17. There's a problem there, man.
Exactly. So my younger brother was 6 inches taller than me, and that did some things to my confidence.
Okay.
I think I was affected, and again, kudos to my father, who always believed in me, even in the times that I didn't believe in myself, and encouraged me. And through his coaching as well as his encouragement, I did well, ultimately representing my province in cricket, and but not in rugby because I was too small. And then finishing school, I had always, as long back as I can remember, wanted to be a vet.
Okay.
And that was reinforced by some encounters I had with people who were unkind about some of the things I'm talking about. So I did become a little bit of an antisocial person.
Right.
Went to university, went to Pretoria to study vet science.
Okay.
And while I was there, in a very short space of time, became an atheist because the presentation of evolution and essentially working with that worldview, I found, not only from an intellectual point of view, but also from a moral point of view, it was much more convenient to be an atheist.
Yes.
To not have to account. My mom wasn't there to watch me.
Yes.
And so I didn't want God watching me either. Anyway, so I became an atheist and became quite an aggressive or evangelistic atheist, if there is such a thing. And I was staying in the YMCA in Pretoria, which is also ironic.
Yeah, that's...
there were a couple of Christians in that YMCA, but for the most part we were pagan barbarians.
I think the Greek word for that is a jawl.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
We were on a jawl. And I think what happened in the course of toward the end of my first year I was a young guy had come to the YMCA because just to say about the other Christians, God bless them, and they all became good friends later. But most of them seemed to be misfits and nerds, and so I didn't kind of hang out with them anyway, and so then this guy came who was a young man with. Yeah, he was sensible. He was articulate. He was part of the gang. He related to us and related with us. Had a great sense of humor. All of those things, and then he started sharing his faith with us over the snooker table or whatever, and I started to watch him. I don't think consciously, it wasn't a conscious choice, but I just became a little bit drawn to what it was that was different about him. And it ended up one night with me being in part of a pub crawl. We had gone out, come back under the weather, and he had shown a movie, a Billy Graham movie in the common room. And we got in on the tail end of the movie, and there was, and we were heckling from the back while he was sharing the gospel and inviting people to make a commitment to Christ. And you used the phrase, a well put phrase earlier when you said Jesus found me, because I wasn't looking for him. Yeah. I was disinterested. I was wanting to bring down people who believed in him. And that night, after all of this went down, this kind of rebellious moment, I staggered to my bedroom and then tried to go to sleep, and found a phrase that had come across in, I'm not sure if it was Billy Graham's sermon or in the story in the movie, but what came across was, Christ died for me.
Sure.
And I'm going, that's the first time I'd heard that. That it wasn't just that Jesus died for the sins of the world, but Jesus died for me. It became a bit of a personal thing. And of course, now I know in retrospect, the Holy Spirit was on that thing, that moment. And so that was going around and around in my head. I couldn't go to sleep, apart from the fact that I was, the room was spinning because of alcohol. But that phrase wouldn't let me go to sleep. And eventually, at one point in the early hours of the morning, I went back to the common room and picked up a pamphlet that he had left on the table to say, if any of you want to know anything more, here's. And there was a little pamphlet called 4 Things God Wants You to Know.
Wow.
And at the end of it, it's got a little prayer. It's a basic outline of the gospel. At the end, it's got a little prayer to pray. And I'd prayed the prayer that C.S. Lewis in his story calls check. It is the prayer, it's really atheistic suicide when you pray that prayer, which was, God, I don't believe in you, but if you're there, show me yourself.
Sure.
And of course, the next chapter of Lewis's book is Checkmate. And that's what I experienced that night, was that immediately I was able to go to sleep. I woke up the next morning and I knew there was a God.
Wow.
I just, everything was different.
Yeah.
It was like the sky was blue. Birds were singing. Now, they'd been singing outside the flipping window all the time, but I became aware of it.
Yeah.
And the most significant thing of all was going back to that upbringing in white suburbia. I was brought up, like most white South African kids of my generation, a racist. Not a belligerent or intentional racist, but just an idiotic racist, in the sense that I I despised other cultures.
Wow.
It was not like something I would investigate, but something I just kind of wrote off. Anything that wasn't like my culture was not okay. And so anyway, I went, and that morning there were people. I was on the first floor. There were people walking past, people of color walking past my window, talking to one another. I heard their voices coming in the window, and I just thought, that's the sweetest sound. I don't know why I'm getting so emotional about it, but
Well, it's beautiful.
but I thought, wow, I just love people.
Yeah.
I'd fallen in love with people while I was sleeping.
Yeah.
Jesus had changed me.
It's crazy.
And particularly, I mean, it manifested as people of other culture and color from me, but in general, I just woke up with love for people. So that was kind of step one in something that then kind of went down the road of God messing completely with my plans.
Sure. So the plan was to avoid humans.
Yes.
And you woke up one morning and you were
Yes.
drawn to humans.
Yes. I used to say, the more I see of people, the better I like animals.
Yes.
And that day, all of that changed from the inside without me inviting it. And I kind of had fallen in love with people. Essentially, again, what I see is, and I say this often in preaching about it, when Jesus comes to live in your heart, he brings all his friends with him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful, actually.
Which is why John says, if you say you love God and you don't love people, you're a liar.
Yeah.
The truth is not in you.
Yeah, and I think the thing for me I've heard your story plenty of times, not with such emotion, but I've heard it many times, and I think the thing that gets me is that we have our plans, we have the purpose that we feel we're about to fulfill, and God has the ability to stop us in our tracks, rewire and reroute us completely. And we find ourselves on the other side of that journey with a whole bunch of new challenges. And so just very quickly, what were some of the challenges that you felt soon after giving your life to Jesus, and he's found you and you've woken up loving people, and you've experienced this rejuvenation? When I think of your story, I think of Jesus calling Zacchaeus down from the tree.
Yes.
And if let's just say it was Costa up the tree, everybody else would have called the antisocial person out the tree, but he called the people lover out the tree. He calls Zacchaeus, which means purity. Yeah. Calls us to who we were created to be. So now you're living in this space. I think it's nice to know for us, because we know you from talking and leading. So what were the areas that you struggled with trying to get right in those early days of following Jesus?
Yeah, I think the first one had to do with that whole thing of self-esteem and of confidence. So I remember shortly after that moment, that waking up, I actually went that morning and went and found my friend who had been this witness to Christ that he was in the YMCA, and told him what I had done. And so, just to make sure that I had done it right, he led me through the prayer again, and then he said a thing which I'm so grateful he did. But it was also at the same time, it made me die a thousand deaths. He said, I want you, when you leave here, to tell the first person you meet what you've just done.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, and of course it was based on a very good principle of confession being the seal, bringing the seal to faith. And so I did that. I walked out of the room. I bumped into one of my fellow atheist friends, the very last person I would have chosen to have to do this with. But I'm so grateful that he told me to do it, and I'm so grateful that something came over me. Must have been the Lord, but I had the courage to say, this is what I've just done. And of course, he looked at me like I just crawled out of cheese. And but the thing that did was it gave me for the first time a sense of, okay, I can stand for what I think, believe, and am without fear. But that wasn't the last time that I had to face that burden, that challenge. I remember the first time, about a week or two after that, he asked me to share my testimony in the chapel. We had a chapel service I think it was every Wednesday or whatever it was. And so my friend Dennis asked me to share my faith, and I was so terrified, paralyzed by it. I said to him, well, you can ask me questions. So he did, but I turned my back on the group. I was so like...
You've come a long way.
Yeah. I mean, so for me, that was the first big challenge. And then of course, again, from there going forward, in fact, just a while ago, I was cleaning out my bookshelf, and I had some old prayer journals of mine going back to those days. And I was struck by the number of times I had written in my prayer journals, reflecting on my time with the Lord, I'm sorry. I'm starting over. Thank you for being the God of new beginnings, over and over. And I was just struck by that the first period of time as a young person coming to faith in Jesus is about dealing with our own sinfulness. And so the things that had changed without me even asking were the things that inspired confidence, for the fact that I know these things can change too. I mean, some of them he did also spontaneously, like he cleaned out my mouth.
Wow.
I was well known in the YMCA for a foul mouth, and like that, he took it all away. I was also obviously drinking heavily, like most students at the time. I never, thank the Lord, never got into the drug scene, but again, instantly took away the desire for that stuff until he allowed me again to enjoy red wine quite a bit later in my life. But as far as at that time, alcohol was it just the flavor of it, the taste, the need for it just disappeared. I struggled more with smoking.
Okay.
And it's a very ironic thing. I struggled to quit smoking because I thought that I had to give up smoking. So, a very silly young man, I went to my first ever youth meeting. So I'm arriving at the youth meeting with a cigarette in my hand, and I'm walking up to the door, and this guy, my friend, introduces me to him, and he says, okay, now that you're a Christian, you've got to quit that. So I thought, oh, really? He said, yeah, Christians don't smoke. And that became the first experience I had of performance-driven Christianity and of essentially legalism and everything that's associated with it. And there began the worst 18 months of my life. I always tell people, I became an expert in giving up smoking. I gave it up at least 150 times in 18 months. And every time would fall back into it and then hate myself and think that God hated me too. Until again, there came a moment. And I was on a train going between Pretoria and Johannesburg, and I heard the Lord say, I was kind of crying out to him a bit about it, and he said, can we get back to where we started?
Yeah.
He said, I want you to get back to where we started as far as this thing is concerned that is upsetting you so much. And I said, you mean I can just love you? He said, yeah, let's try that.
Yeah.
And in fact, I said, you mean I can love you and light this next cigarette? Now, I hope there's nobody listening to this who is thinking that I'm endorsing cigarette smoking. What I am saying is the point about whatever I do, if I'm loving God in the middle of it, He takes care of what needs to change. And so I began like that. I went back to just loving God, not feeling condemned, not feeling guilt-driven in that thing. And 2 weeks later, there came the moment when He said, okay, I'm taking that now.
It's amazing.
And it was gone, and
Sure.
I never struggled with it.
That's amazing, because I think it's really nice to kind of dig into the origin story of. It's also nice to go back and reminisce. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really cool place to kind of now divulge a bit into some of the stuff you've been talking about with biblical leadership. I think a lot of people would love to know a kind of a quick run through, because I mean it's probably quite a long leadership journey at this stage, because
I can sum it up.
You could sum it up, but from just kind of sum up your leadership journey.
Yeah.
Because for me, what I think is incredible is the fact that you were a person who didn't like people, and yet God has used you to lead people pretty much from the outset of your walk with Jesus. So just a run through of your leadership journey would be really nice for us to hear.
Yeah, very, very quickly. One of the early mentors in my life is a guy that you also knew, a guy called Carl Cranier.
Yes.
And Carl came to the YMCA. There's another story involved in that, which also was part of that transformation process, which is this: that he came to preach for us, to share his testimony and preach for us. He was leading a thing called Teen Challenge at the time.
Okay.
A drug rehab program in Hillbrow in Johannesburg, and he came and he preached the gospel, and he was one of the finest evangelistic preachers I ever heard. And he came. We invited all our friends that we had been trying to witness to, and without effect. And Carl preached, and that night 23 guys came to faith in Jesus. And I looked at this and I said, what has he got that we haven't got?
Yes.
And it turned out it was the fact that he had this testimony of having been empowered by the Holy Spirit, experienced a thing called the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And through Carl and my friend Dennis, we both, in fact, experienced that experience, the infilling of the Holy Spirit that changed everything for us. And the effect of that was immediately a sense of not just compassion for people, a love for people, but a desire to see them come to faith. Not just a desire, but a determination. I guess that was the first level of calling that I experienced. And so I started going with Carl into the streets of Hillbrow every Friday and Saturday night. And I also started doing some volunteer work at the drug rehab place. And Carl would take me around to share my testimony. And the difference between that time of standing with my back to the crowd and going and sharing my testimony in youth groups and schools and things was very, very clear, a big difference. So, and my starting to do that and then working with a youth group, and it was like leadership ran me down for the first time. I suddenly found that the people were looking to me to say, lead us into the streets of Hillbrow, lead us as far as this group is concerned. And I saw fruit from it. I saw people's lives change. I saw young people who had also been like me, retiring and feeling inadequate, etc., and have a boldness come upon them and make a difference in the lives of those kids who were shooting up heroin in the back streets of Hillbrow. So it was a wonderful thing in terms of seeing that as we as I was doing the work, there were people who kind of looked to me for a bit of an example, and at the same time, it was a humbling thing.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of it, and from there, as I said, God had started messing up my plans early on, and at the end of the next 2 years, he 3 or 4 different ways he spoke to me about ministry. And I tried to fight it off. I said, I can still minister while I'm a vet and all of this kind of thing. But eventually, all of that, he shut the door and spoke to me in what seemed like an audible voice. And the thing he said to me was so profound. It was like this: go to sleep and I'll tell you in the morning. That's what he said. So I fell asleep. The next morning I woke up and I was reading from the book of Joel, and it used this phrase. It says, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. And in that I heard this: God is calling me to be involved in evangelism, the evangelization of the multitudes. So I saw myself as Africa's Billy Graham, up and coming. And that's not at all how it turned out, but I think that became the motivation for everything else that I did. I quit university. I started studying, doing an internship in the church, leading youth, getting involved in a Bible school type environment like you've got here, with the pastors of the church and other teachers who spoke into our lives. It was a wonderful journey for the next 3 years, and also studying through UNISA, and then 2 other things happened. The first was that I met my wife.
Yes.
And chased her, pursued her, ran her down like any good Greek youngster, self-respecting youngster does when you've seen the woman of your dreams.
Yes.
And we got married, and 2 years after that, we planted our first church. And so it was just a kind of natural evolution initially. There was the calling and the natural evolution of leadership finding me at the appropriate moments. And from there, it became a journey of the leading churches. That was where leadership began and ended for me. But at the same time, it just seemed like wherever, like my friend said, if you stand still for 5 minutes, a committee forms around you. And there was that there was then stuff happening with regard to the region. And then we became very aware of, it was like God did a thing with us as leaders about social justice. And so we started to become involved with squatter communities, informal settlements, and standing for justice for them. And then I completely messed up the church because it was a whites-only church up until that time.
Wow. And
we went across the railway line and found people and started leading them to Christ and helping them in legal aid and feeding and all kinds of things. And it was one of the communities in Cape Town that was suffering group areas removals.
Wow, okay.
And so we were kind of standing between them and the authorities that were doing this. And then they started coming to church. And so the leaders didn't like that.
Wow.
I was messing up their shiny white church. And so they said, I was then told by my superior, I'm out of there.
Wow.
And that was the thing. So leadership journeys are punctuated by a lot of things where God frustrates what you would have otherwise been doing so that he can take you to the next stage of the journey.
Yeah.
That moment when the church basically fired me because I had messed it up, led me to like being dragged, kicking and screaming across the Karoo from Cape Town to Johannesburg. The next month, John Wimber came to town.
Wow.
And we were there and met John and heard John. And I said, he was talking about the church I would join. And when I heard him talk about the church he would join, I said, I want to join that church. And so that was the start of our journey in terms of asking John to help us plant the first Vineyard Church in South Africa in 1982.
And you can insert in the rest is history, hey?
And the rest
That's crazy.
is history.
I mean, that then led to the first Vineyard Church in Johannesburg, and then obviously networks coming out of that, a movement kind of birthed from that initial church plant, a movement that I'm very, very blessed to be a part of.
Yeah. In fact, the second church plant when God said to us, now plant churches.
Yeah.
Is this church that we're in right now.
Shout out Vineyard Durban. And then, I mean, it's just incredible because in all of that time, and then obviously you were national director for many years and impacted lives of people incredibly. I think I'd like to tell a quick story. We were at a national conference. It was in Simonstown many years ago, and you were still national director, and there was an issue with the lighting, and basically guys had climbed up ladders and had probably duct taped some form of black bag or piece of material to block the light out so we could see the overhead screen. And being in the room at the time and wanting to help fix the issue, I was climbing up a ladder. And I don't even know if you remember the story. And I remember feeling like, oh, there's someone else on the ladder. It's always nice when you're up a ladder to have somebody holding the ladder. And I was kind of almost 3/4 up in that part of standing on a ladder where if you get it wrong,
you're going to take your life in your hands.
It's going to be a fun drive to the hospital. And then you just felt that stability. I turned down and it was you. You had actually climbed up halfway up the ladder. I had actually dropped the piece of duct tape that I was using and you had passed it up to me. And the reason why I'm telling that story is you've spoken in your lectures, spoiler alert for those of you who haven't watched them yet, but you've spoken about the importance of servant leadership. And I've always just thought that's such a great picture of not many people that have a title, national director or pastor, or the other titles that so many people put that attaches themselves to titles, would kind of do that menial job. And so I'd love for you just to unpack just very quickly as we begin to wrap up a bit with regards to the importance of servant leadership, the function and not the title, and the fight against what I experience all the time, I'm sure we all do, is the fight against the ego when we are trying to be humble shepherds of people.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Matt, and I didn't remember that story, but I think it does, as you say, illustrate the point. I think I discovered the power of servant leadership by accident. And only afterwards did God kind of unpack it for me. But it goes back in a way. It goes back to my time as a scout leader. I was the troop leader of a scout troop, and one afternoon the scoutmaster came to the cabin, the log cabin that we were in, and I was sweeping the floor. And he said, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, who else is going to do it? So he said, no, you need to get other people to do it, because that's the leader's job. The leader's job is not to do everything, but to get other people to do it. And I just kind of said, well, I don't know. I think I made a joke like, if you want something done well, you must do it yourself. Done properly, you must do it yourself. So I just continued to do that. And then what I started to find is that someone would come and respond and say, "Can I help you?"
Yes.
Or, "Why are you doing that? Let me do that, and you can do something else," or whatever. And so I found that, in fact, it's about both meeting the need, finding a need and meeting it on the one hand, and second of all, leadership by example. That becomes the dynamic that drives servant leadership, benefiting people, but on the other hand, recognizing that if you want them to do something, whichever the them is, first do it yourself, and people will, which is the principle of disciple making.
Yeah.
Like Jesus did. Do it while they watch, let them help, let them do it while you watch, let them go and give it a go and come back and report back, and then leave them doing it.
Yeah, so true.
So that's really, I guess, where it started for me. And every church that we ever planted, every ministry I ever wanted to get started, I think the same principle became clear. I remember someone, when we planted the last church we planted in Melville, Johannesburg, when a lady who was with her husband, they'd been involved in missions for donkey's years, and she walked into the church and I was sweeping the floor, and that same conversation happened. "Why are you doing this? I've never seen the pastor sweeping the floor." And again, that same process continued. So I've sort of, as I said, I discovered it almost by accident, but now I'm absolutely convinced that there is no other way to do spiritual leadership, biblical leadership, than by taking the way of the slave, the servant.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things you speak about is vision. And I just thought very quickly, if you can just unpack, it's really nice to hear the kind of the theory behind vision and what it is and how it helps us. And I think it's really important. But practically speaking, let's just say there's some people watching today, it's murky. They can't really maybe see the final product. What are a few basic steps to kind of start clearing up vision, so that we can present a clear picture to people follow us? Because again, something you said to me, I don't know if you remember, you've said this to me before, is one of the most terrifying things as a leader is when you turn around and there are people following you, and then you realize, well, now what do I do?
Yeah.
And now you've got to tell them something. And sometimes in that space of realizing, now how do we clarify something, where are we going? Maybe just share with us a bit about that.
Good. This is something that I do all the time with my coaching clients, and I think pastors are no less in need of this skill, or if you like, this permission. In brief, the thing that we all have to do is something that Jesus alludes to, is recovering and making friends again with the inner child. By the inner child, I mean that part of us that is able to imagine, that is able to not live in the world of ugly reality, but in a world of fantasy and dreaming and playing games and not having to color inside the lines. And so very often I need to take people through a process, and I needed to do this myself because I suppose my natural bent was rationality and thought and theory and etc. And I think it's about engaging this thing of saying, if everything went perfectly well for you and God really had his way with what he wants to make of you, what does that picture look like? And spending time, at least every few months, if not every week, spending time dreaming dreams and dreaming with God. So it's that thing I mentioned in the lecture, Psalm 37 verse 4. Delight yourself in the Lord. In other words, be in a place of worship and of enjoying God, and he will give you the desires of your heart. What does that mean? He will stimulate desires. He will cause you to desire what he desires. It's like Jesus saying, abide in me and let my words abide in you, and then you can ask whatever you want,
Yeah.
and it'll be given to you. When I first read that, I thought, that's the most reckless thing I've ever heard. Do you know me? Do you know the kind of things I'm going to ask if you let me ask for anything I want? And he said, no, but you didn't read the fine print. The fine print is, immerse yourself in me, let my words be pervasive through every pore of your being, and then ask what you want.
Yeah.
Because you're going to start wanting what I want. So that's how I read that text, that we will find desires arising in us when we immerse ourselves in God, delight ourselves in God, that we may never have thought of before. And then when we start writing the vision and start unpacking it and putting in more detail, and sometimes if I'm leading a group, I need to do that together with the group and say, you guys can color in some of this picture because you bring colors to it that I can't. And so there's another thing altogether about group strategizing or group vision casting, which is vital for in a church context. But it is that it's the same dynamic. It's about dreaming as a group. It's about dreaming as husband and wife.
Yeah.
Again, in marriage counseling, I talk about that so often. Having a couple need to put aside all of the stuff, the conflict, the hard work, the stuff of marriage, and stop and go, let's dream a dream again.
Yeah.
What did we sign up for? Why? What's your vision? I ask people, what's your vision for your marriage? They go, vision for my marriage? What do you say?
Yeah.
No, get a vision. You need to be going somewhere, otherwise anywhere will do. You need to know where you're going. So it's about imagination. Jesus saying the kingdom of God is like a child. This child personifies the kingdom, which is that beautiful, innocent, imaginative, playful, getting outside of the ordinary and getting back into the extraordinary, which is God's will.
Yeah, it's really good. And the good news is, if you're struggling, to put words down, Matthew 28 is quite a good quite a good start.
Oh yes.
As well.
Oh yes.
Like, if it fits in that grid, then you're off to a good start.
Yeah, exactly.
If it doesn't, maybe try again. I think that's really, it's important for us to hear, because I think sometimes we just think of vision, we think, sit down, write down your vision statement, but it's more than just that. It's, if you know who you are, then you know where you need to go. There's clarity. And if there's uncertainty with who you are, it makes sense that the future's going to look murky.
Exactly.
And I love the fact that we're a people, if we follow Jesus, we're a people, we know where we're going. And that helps, I think that helps us big time.
Yeah, it's great to have the end game settled already. Eh?
And then just share quickly a season, a moment in your life where you struggled with this. I mean, I know it can happen. You coaching seasoned pastors and leaders, and I'm sure there must be a reality of where the vision dries up and it gets blurry.
Yeah.
So just speak to that.
Yeah. In fact, for me, the point at which I discovered this in practice, it was actually my wife. It was Lorraine who galvanized this in my life, and it's been that practice for me ever since. We had been through some really difficult transitions in the church that we had been moved from Cape Town to in the Rand, Johannesburg area, and it had really kind of apart from that encounter with Wimber, the rest of that year was a very hard one, and betrayal by leaders, and up against a system that was seemingly impossible to shift, and a loss of confidence in me. And I was depressed. I mean, I know what that is now. I didn't know it at the time, but I was down in the dumps. I was not pleasant to be around. I was irritable, and I had, in fact, lost all hope of what the future could be like. We were driving out in the country going to visit someone at the time, and Lorraine just turned to me and said, "Tell me the dream again."
Wow.
There's that ambush again. And it was like her invitation was like it was like the voice of God that just gave me permission again to get out of the ordinary, like I was just talking about. And so I started to say it. And as I started to say it, I was confessing hope. And as I confessed hope, it became stronger. And eventually, by the end of that car ride, both of us were almost not quite hysterical, but we were laughing. We were joyful. We were believing again, and seeing a future that could be, and not hesitating to embrace it. So, and that's from that day onwards. I've made the practice ever since of every year I take time to rewrite and refine and add to and etc. my vision. And so the encouragement of a person to just give me that permission, that's what helped me.
Yeah.
So very often I think the same when I'm, as I say, talking to clients.
That's really good. I love that, because what it means is actually we must enjoy this thing.
Yes.
We're meant to enjoy this.
Yes.
It's not about,
Yeah.
Obviously there are tough moments and there are tough seasons. Anybody watching this that's involved in ministry on some level knows that there are going to be bad days. That's not to say that, but there's an enjoyment in it. And speaking of that, I want to I could go on talking for ages with you. But just to wrap up, speaking of enjoying things, one of the things I love about you and your family is the laughter. I think one of my great memories, for those of you watching, was I got lost in New York with Costa once, and all we had was a Diners Club card.
Yes.
And I don't think we'll get into trouble for this. No one took the Diners Club card anywhere in New York, and the only thing we found was a place that sold cheesecake. That's what I remember.
Yes.
And that, like those memories of just joyfulness. So maybe just let's end this incredible conversation with one of, I don't know, a funny story, something where the joy was there, and end with the great fun story of ministry for us.
Okay. It'll be at someone else's expense. But I would say the funniest moment I could think of in ministry was when we were in a conference with John Wimber, and they'd come out. We were in a pastor's conference at Mount Grace, as I remember, and John was ministering, and he had a word of knowledge, and the word of knowledge was about a woman who had found a lump in her breast and was worried that it was cancerous. And so he said, "Is that woman in the room?" And nobody moved. And then he said, "I'm still waiting for that woman, because I believe that God has a word for you about it. We are supposed to pray for you, but he has a word for you about it." And so he waited and nobody moved. And then he said, "I'm not sure exactly how old you are, but by the look of it, you're about 40. So at this point, all of us are falling about, either laughing or trying to hide our heads under the seats. I remember Bob Fulton sitting in that front row, and the back of his head, his bald spot on the back of his head was glowing red like a traffic light. And he is going, like he's trying to get John's attention to stop. And he said, then he said, "Costa, is it okay to speak of a woman having breasts in South Africa, having a breast?" So then eventually nothing happened. That person didn't step forward, and your father actually wrote a note. because they said, can anybody with questions write it on a piece of paper and pass it forward. So your father, Brett, writes a thing to say, John, is it your understanding that women in South Africa only have one breast? We laughed about that for the rest of the week.
Brett. That's classic. I think one of the things for me that is special about this thing of following Jesus, we do it together. And so I just want to say thank you for the years of friendship, not just to me, to my family, to us as a church, for the faithfulness, for the obedience to the word that God has given you, the drum that you keep beating, the drum to keep it simple. So thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, and hope to see you soon.
And thank you for your loyalty and your commitment to what we announced at the beginning. I think you're even more loyal than your parents, who are the great loyalists to everything about this. And I mean loyalty to the values.
Thank you.
To the vision we saw at the beginning.
It's awesome.
So keep the flag flying.
Thank you.
Bless you.
So we just want to say thank you so much for joining us and for hanging out with us for this time. We hope, School of Leadership students, that this has been an incredibly beneficial time for you, that you've learned, that you've grown. For those of you who don't know this book, Giving Leadership, it's a fantastic look into really good information about what it means to lead well. In the 21st century, Costa's got some incredible stuff in there. You can find it anywhere that sells books. And so thank you for joining us. We'll see you soon.